move on to Module 4, where we're going to talk about how we can assess all other calcifications in the breast, so not those on our characteristically benign list that we reviewed or in those 4 special cases. And I'm going to first talk about distribution, and we're going to talk about distribution first. All other calcifications that we didn't just review, BI-RADS allows us to come to an appropriate assessment and management if we look at both information on their morphology as well as their distribution. And I'm going to start this module by reviewing the different distributions. We have diffuse, regional, grouped. Of note, we no longer use the term clustered in our BI-RADS lexicon. Grouped has replaced the term clustered, and linear and segmental, and these are in order of most benign to most suspicious calcifications based on their distribution. So let's review what each of these distributions are. And first, we're just going to comment. This is a chart from our Rads Atlas showing the different positive predictive values of malignancy for these types of calcifications. And we see diffuse calcifications are very rarely cancer and increasing as we go from regional to group to linear and segmental. And linear and segmental have very high PPVs of malignancy, so we want to make sure we're aware of what those distributions look like. So we'll start with diffuse. This is defined as calcifications that are randomly distributed throughout the breast. This suggests a benign process. So let's take a look at these diffuse round and punctate calcifications. This is a benign process. Now, I just want to make the point that diffuse means random, and the random distribution and nature of calcifications is to group together, so it does not mean evenly distributed. And the key to benignity is truly that no one area looks more suspicious than any other area. As here we see, again, diffuse is randomly distributed through the breast. Again, some of these may group together, but there are multiple similar appearing groups and no one area looks more suspicious than the other. Regional calcifications, this is defined as numerous calcifications that occupy greater than 2 centimeters in greatest dimension that are not in a ductal distribution. This suggests a benign process, but we also need to consider our morphology. So here we have an example of regional calcifications. Again, these are in greater than 2 centimeters of breast tissue. This is a pretty neutral descriptor. Again, suggests benign, but we need to look at the morphology whenever we see calcifications in a regional distribution. Grouped, again, I just want to make the point that this used to be called clustered, but now we've dropped the term clustered and we just use the term grouped. And this is defined as having greater than or equal to 5 calcifications in less than 2 centimeters of breast tissue. And this is a neutral descriptor. Again, we're going to look at several things such as the morphology of calcifications that present in groups so that we can come to an appropriate assessment and management for these calcifications. Here we have different groups of calcifications. So the image on the left you might recognize. We've seen this image before, and this is a group of round and punctate calcifications. These are at least 5 calcifications, again, in less than 2 centimeters of tissue. And this, again, is a round punctate morphology. So if this was her baseline, like we just talked about, we've shown in the literature that this has a less than 2% chance of malignancy, and that we can give these a BI-RADS 3 and watch them. This is as opposed to the image on the right. We're going to review suspicious morphologies in the next module, but I'll tell you that this is a group of calcifications, again, multiple calcifications in less than 2 centimeters of breast tissue, but these are what we call a coarse heterogeneous morphology. We talked earlier that we have multiple bilateral groups of coarse heterogeneous calcifications. We can dismiss that as benign. However, a single group of coarse heterogeneous calcifications is going to be a BI-RADS 4, and we're going to recommend a biopsy. So moving on to our 2 last distributions, which are both suspicious. We'll start with linear. These are calcifications in a line that suggests the ductal location and is suspicious for all morphologies that do not fall into the characteristically benign calcifications that we reviewed earlier. So here we have calcifications that are in a linear distribution. These calcifications line up. These are going to be smaller than those large rod-like calcifications we talked about earlier, and they're going to not have the tram track or soft tissue density signs to suggest vascular. So these linear calcifications do require biopsy. These would be a BI-RADS for a suspicious finding. And segmental is going to be the last distribution and the most suspicious distribution. This suggests deposits along a ductal distribution, and this is suspicious for all morphologies. So here we see an example of fine pleomorphic calcifications in a segmental distribution. And what, again, does segmental mean? Well, here we have this wedge-shaped area of calcifications with apex pointing toward the nipple. And why this is suspicious is because it suggests a ductal distribution, and we know that our cancers form in the ductal system, so this is a very suspicious finding. So with that, I would like to thank you.